Analysis of Latin America's economy in 2013 and what could be in store for next year, I spoke with two experts, Eric Farnsworth, Vice President, Council of the Americas here in Washington, and Russ Dallen, President and Editor-in-Chief of Latin America's Herald Tribune in Davie, Florida. I asked each of them if Latin America met their economic expectations for the year.
There was a high expectation that growth would be high, that the trend line would continue to be positive, and actually it was. It just wasn't as high as a lot of people anticipated or frankly wanted. Some of that has to do with the slowing China, which is the top trade partner of some of these economies, including Brazil and Peru and Chile. Some of it is a continued sluggishness in North America and Europe, some of the main trading partners. Some of it has to do with structural issues, lack of infrastructure that continues to challenge the region. So I think it's multifaceted, but we have to keep the expectations, I think, appropriate. And if we do, we see that the region continues to grow, continues to improve, perhaps just not as fast as some people would like.
Russ, should we be disappointed in the lack of growth that we've seen in 2013 from South America?
Yes. The caveat is that actually Latin America split along its east-west axis, so that those countries on the Pacific side actually did incredibly well compared to those countries on the Atlantic side. For example, Peru was the stellar performer, had 4.8% GDP growth in 2013. Chile had 4.1% GDP growth. But on the east side, dominated by Brazil with a mediocre 2.3, just barely ahead of its population growth. Argentina with 2.7, and Venezuela with a negative maybe 1%.
All right, guys, let's try this. There are some that are doing better than others, and Russ highlighted a couple of them. Let me start with a couple that we focused on this year on BizAsia America. Mexico in particular has made some significant changes. They've pushed through most recently the energy reform proposals as it has passed both the Senate and the House there. This is a big deal. This could be a game changer. We've had guests on before that have said that these reforms are necessary for growth to sort of expand in 2014. And I just wanted to see if you felt this optimistic about that, Eric.
Well, I do. These are significant reforms. The political process has come together in Mexico really to address some issues that have been longstanding for many, many years. We haven't seen necessarily the political reforms yet translate through into economic growth, in large measure because they haven't been implemented yet. They've just been passed, and there's a process, in fact, the energy reforms, which are a game changer in my view, but you still have to have implementing legislation, then you have to have the actual process of investment, then you have to have drilling, and you have to actually get the energy to the surface and all of these things. That's a multi-year process. And so this is just the beginning of that. But having said that, I think the reform process in Mexico really does open the door to a much more sustainable economic growth path. And I think a lot of people are very encouraged by that, see some real progress in Mexico, and would anticipate over time that this is going to structurally improve the Mexican economy, perhaps with as much as 1 or even a 1.5 of GDP growth every year.
Russ, do we embrace Mexico's push towards free markets and capitalism, or is there a but here?
I think that it's a realization that they need outside investment and capital, as well as outside expertise and some capitalistic flavor to grow what has become a stagnant industry. And Eric's exactly right. While they may see GDP growth of 1.3% this year, which is pretty anemic, we're expecting as a result of these changes and the capital inflows that they'll experience, perhaps over 4% GDP growth in 2014 for Mexico.
All right, let's take the opposite of perhaps what's happening in Mexico and go to Venezuela, where some controversial moves have taken place. A lot's changed there. There's new administration, but there's also been a lot of talk and execution on price controls and perhaps privatization, or I should say the opposite of privatization, government taking over a lot of, well, industries that were private. Is this a good thing, Eric?
The fact of the matter is the government continues to do what it says it was going to do. But I think that the results are plain to see, that once these policies have been implemented and in fact deepened over time, you've seen the economy not just struggle, but actually deteriorate. And this at a time when energy prices are at a historic high, when Venezuela should be reaping the reward, really, of having the second largest reserves, proven reserves of petroleum in the entire world. And yet they're struggling economically. They're struggling just with basic growth. And as Russ, I think, can tell you, they are struggling with shortages of basic goods that a very wealthy country should be able to provide as a matter of course to its citizens. So I think there is a real concern about Venezuela in 2014. Nobody, of course, knows the ultimate scenario, but it is a country that one has to watch very carefully. And I don't think they're out of the woods by any stretch.
While we're not surprised because it's been well announced by the administration there, it does have impacts to the citizens who live in Venezuela and perhaps its neighbors as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's Venezuela is a heartbreaker in many ways, and Eric's exactly right. With the largest oil reserves in the world, it's more than Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia produces 10 million barrels a day. Venezuela can't even produce 3 million barrels a day. And then that's actually gone down over the last decade and a half. It's a tragedy. As far as inflation goes, they haven't even reported their inflation for May. It's due usually in the first 10 days of the month. They haven't reported it, and we're already well past that time. At last report, it was about 54%. This last one probably puts it in closer to 60% annual inflation.
Russ, let me interrupt you here. It's historically around the world when we've seen rampant inflation and perhaps a little bit of a chaotic scene on the ground. We've also seen perhaps the seeds of some real discontent among the common folks and the citizens there. Is that something you might be worried about for 2014 if they don't get inflation under control?
I think it's not just inflation. The population is split, and where you have that kind of divisiveness and disagreement on the way a country should go, in a situation where there is also shortages, rampant inflation, and a host of other economic problems, then you have, yes, the seeds for further discontent, as we're seeing, for example, in Argentina. Where inflation has driven price pressures, inflation of 30%, it's the second highest in Latin America after Venezuela, has driven problems there and people rioting in the street and asking for raises. So,
gentlemen, let me get to the
happen in the future.
In the room, so to speak, or the elephant in South America, and that is Brazil. It is going to be a huge year for Brazil. A huge couple of years, actually. They're getting ready for the World Cup, the Olympics, all this stuff is coming up. Infrastructure is being spent, but not everyone's happy, Eric. What's going on here?
Well, again, this is an expectations game, and I think what we're seeing across the hemisphere is certainly being played out in microcosm in Brazil. There's no question about it. Brazil is a country that for a decade many people have been saying is a country that's arrived. It's one of the BRICS countries. It's now the 6th largest economy in the world. I mean, this is a country that's a major global player, and yet at the personal level, at the local level, some people haven't seen a whole lot of changes. I mean, the infrastructure continues to be overburdened. It still takes far too long, for example, to get to work, yet prices keep going up for public transportation.
Trickled down to the average person.
And so the quality of life is a real problem. But 2014, I think, because of that, but also because some of the issues that you raise is going to be very interesting. You've also got an election year, and President Rousseff has to run for re-election, and so there will be some political issues that one has to look forward to as well in 2014.
Thank you.